and walking in this. Oh, so we are recording. But yeah, just as you tune in, the world's been kind of a little crazy since the last time we did this. And as COVID has kind of taken a new round and churches are kind of moving forward. Johnson, how's your family doing? I know that they had COVID. How's everyone doing in your household?
Yeah. Thank you, Pastor Jason. Thank you for all your prayers. They have recovered by God's grace. So
Good.
the best part is, God kind of somehow made me that I couldn't catch it, and I could serve them, right? So
Good.
Everybody except me.
Good. But maybe you can be like just the guy that just goes in everywhere and like does stuff that no one gets it around you. That's good. So we had to isolate at my household over Christmas holidays because we thought we had it, but you know how the testing went. So we heard back like literally yesterday that we didn't actually have it, but the testing came back 2.5 weeks later. But so we isolated anyways for nothing, but it's probably the safer thing to do. So anyways, we'll kind of get rolling. Anyone else have COVID in their households? Okay. So you guys doing okay?
Yeah, we're well now. During the Christmas break, all of us had it though, so that kind of sucked. But yeah, we're good now.
Good. Glad you're feeling better. Anyone else? Everyone okay that way? So okay, good. Well, let's get rolling tonight. So what I want to talk about tonight is I want to talk a little bit about leadership team development. And so at the district, one of the things that we talk about all the time is the idea of healthy churches, healthy leaders. You're going to hear that a lot. That's kind of our new slogan, if you will. And that's what we want to lean on. We believe that where there's healthy leaders, there will be healthy churches. And when we pour in and invest into the leaders, and by leaders, we're intentional not to just say pastors, that we actually believe that it's the leaders of the church. As they're healthy and the pastor's healthy, so too the church will probably follow. And I think that's true anywhere. Like if you put on any given church in our district and you put one of our strong leaders, if you put, Kevin Shepherd, and you threw him into pretty much any church in our district, chances are, like if it was the most dysfunctional church, in 10 years, it'll probably have a level of health to it. You know what I mean? If there's somebody there, because he'll intentionally work on the leaders being healthy. He'll be healthy himself and he'll bring around that health. And so that's not to disparage those who haven't been able to get there. But it is to say the onus is on us as the leaders to be the one that set the atmosphere around healthy leadership. We're the most important role that we would serve as leaders is the gatekeeper to who becomes the leaders. And I talk about, we have a district exec meeting on Wednesday, and that's like one of the most important things as our district executive. Who are we setting up for leadership down the road? Who are we investing into to create pathways, ramps, if you will, to get into leadership in the future? And so we need to work on that area. And so tonight I want to talk a little bit about, I want to give you 8 things around selecting the right leaders and how to select leaders well. And then I want to talk about how you can be a blessing and retain a healthy environment for those leaders. Okay, so we're going to talk about 2 different areas and kind of get right into it and go for it tonight, just as we journey. And so before we get into it though, maybe Terry, do you want to just open us up in prayer?
Sure. Father God, we come to you tonight and we're so grateful, Lord, for your presence, for your sustaining strength in this season. God, I just pray that you would refresh us as we just speak about leadership and we just learn tonight. God, I pray that you would equip us, Lord, to do the things that you have called us to. Lord, we need you. We recognize our need for you. Lord, help us so that we can run this race well. And just may this time be a blessing in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So I'm going to give you 8 things real quick. We'll talk about them. Once again, I'm just going to lead tonight where you can feel free to interject as you go along. I'll pause at some moments if someone doesn't interject. But it's better if it's a conversation rather than me just chatting at you. Okay. So the first one is if you're going to select leaders well, I believe you need to do your research. And so a healthy amount of research around the leaders is really important. So I start with number one, creep them, and look on their Facebook, look on their social media. What kind of stuff are they posting? Are they posting things that would make you want to represent your ministry? If not, that's a question mark. I talk to boards when I do pastoral search programs with boards, and this is just an inside track for you. And so I tell the boards when they're looking for a new pastor, I say, creep that person on social media, like find out what they're writing, what they're putting. And so many boards will come back to me and say, you know what, we saw this pastor, but their posts, like, we just decided we don't want them as our pastor. And it happens almost every single time I do a search process. At least one of those candidates is like completely invalidated right off the beginning. And that's sad to say when it's a pastor, right? But their posts aren't representative of the nature and the spirit that you would want as a leader. And so I start there, like just see what they're saying, see what's going on in their heart. Like it's out of the heart a person speaks, right? And so much so they put it on social media. Sometimes out of their heart they speak on social media as well. So just look to that. Secondly, I would say contact former pastors. Sometimes we're nervous to do that because we're like, well, maybe it finished bad, but you can take it all with a grain of salt. But talk to other people that they served with. How long were they there? How well did they serve? What are their strengths and weaknesses? How did they treat people? As we do that research on them, I think it's important sometimes to do some spiritual gifts and strengths profiles with people, and so look at like what do they bring to the table. Do our research with people and spend time. That's the first one. We're so quick sometimes to put people in leadership. Once again, one of the chief things you do is deciding who the leaders are, and so therefore that should be where you spend a large amount of your time, is developing the leaders. And so I encourage you to do your research, number one. Number two, I would say look for character, and that's pretty easy to say. This is a tough one to determine, but that old adage, slow to hire and quick to fire. And I'm not a person that actually fires too many people. It's only happened like never for me. But as I work people along through a system. But when it comes to leadership, character things need to be addressed. And so sometimes we pick the person, like, you think back when they picked Saul and they're like, oh, he's he's taller than everybody, he's handsome, he's a warrior, like he's got all the giftings. But there's some character issues. And I think in our own lives, what are we can kind of sometimes be blinded by the giftings that we brush past character things. And so those are the things that are the key spots. So look for character issues. That's a harder one to like quantify sometimes, and takes a little bit more time with people as we look through. The third one that I'd say is we need to look for maturity in leaders. And so are those leaders, do they have a level of maturity that they bring to the table? So maturity is different than age too. So this is something that I found out like on the journey, and you guys all know this, but maturity is very different than age. And so look for people that are mature. I've found elderly people that are super immature, like super duper immature. Vice versa, I've found some younger people that have a level of maturity around them. Spiritual maturity is also important. Scripture talks about this. It says, be careful to put young believers into leadership positions right away because it can cause them challenges. It's like there's something happens, and I always challenge our every person that I bring into a leadership position that forevermore, as soon as you're a leader, you're going to see the church differently. And that comes with some positives, but it also comes with some negatives. It's like, you kind of go into the sausage factory and you see how the sausage is made. It can sometimes make you go, oh. And all of a sudden, you're going to discover things as a leader that you didn't know before. All of a sudden, you're going to see the ugly side of church sometimes. There's going to be moments when you can't unsee how a person behaves, or a letter that they write to the leadership team, or whatever, you know what I mean? Or if there's a staffing issue that has to be resolved, or whatever it is. And that's a challenge point. I say that to our district executive when they come on to our district executive teams. It's same, it's just a different level of leadership. I say, you got to be cautious because you're going to see things that you can't unsee. And there's going to be those moments. And so you need to be mature in your faith. I've actually, in the journey of this, working with church boards across the district, I've found many very immature leaders. And I've actually found where it's damaged some people in their faith. And I had to work through it, where they just came in and they were a warm body. And so the church was like, yeah, okay, you can be on my lead team. You're willing. But they were just a new believer. And then they came in and they were like, oh, I wasn't expecting all of this. And it actually caused harm to their spiritual walk. And so I just want to encourage you and challenge you to make sure that you're looking for maturity when it comes to leaders. It doesn't mean that they have to be fully complete. That, like, there's a development process that's going to take place, but setting some bars up for that. The next one is, I believe we need to look for servant-heartedness in our leaders. And so are they clamoring for leadership, or are they servant-hearted minded? So usually I find that the people who are asking to be leaders are usually the ones that I don't want to be leaders. It's those that aren't necessarily asking to be leaders that usually make the best leaders along the way. Those people who are like, can I be a leader? Can I be a leader? Can I be a leader? Usually there's like back to the maturity factor. Usually there's an issue there, and there's something that needs to be addressed. And so look for people that have that servant-heartedness. Are they contributors outside of leadership? And this is a big question. If they only contribute if they have a leadership title or a leadership thing, then they're probably not the people you want as leaders. I have this guy I was on a call with today. His name's Tom. And Tom was in our church in Waterdown, and he was a lawyer and a very accomplished leader. Like, he was just an amazing guy. And you know what he signed up for to start? He signed up to do custodial work at the church. And so his volunteer position, he's just there serving. He's doing cleanup, he's vacuuming the floors, he's cleaning the bathrooms. And this guy is like a lawyer over many lawyers. He's the head of a huge company. And he just had that servant-hearted mentality. That's the guy you're like, whoa, okay, I need you to be on our lead team. You have just that servant-heartedness. So I would want to encourage you to look for those servant-hearted people. Be careful with job titles. If people are like, okay, I want a title, that's like a big danger sign for me. That's like a big beacon of danger. Like, be very careful of assigning titles, that because somewhere along the way you're going to grow. And whenever people have a title, then it means that they have to have that title removed to relinquish said title. And down the road, that can be a challenge. And so I think one of the things that we're too quick to do when we plant churches, and I see this all the time, is we give all these people job titles, like boom, 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 boom. And then it can create some issues down the road. And so if you do give them a title, give it to them for a specific time. We are going to do, like, one of the things that I think is healthy is to call your leadership team at the beginning a launch team, so that everyone knows this is just a getting started team. And then we're going to form a leadership team down the road, but you're on the launch team. And so therefore you can vet them kind of through and see what they're like, because you might not have the leaders at the beginning that you need to get to where you want to go on the next stage. And so you can set leadership times around those title names, if you will, that have end dates in mind, and think through that. We're going to have our 2022 fall launch team. And so that's what they're going to be. And then that has an expiry date. you can work with them. Yep, sure.
Would you still be concerned if the individuals that you're potentially giving titles to are people that are like really good friends of yours, and you've known them for quite a bit, and you know kind of what you're looking for that role, at least presently, and you know that they would do a really good job and could see them doing this for many, many years, God willing? Would you be open to giving people titles in those situations, or is that still concerning for you?
It's different being a friend and being a leader of your friends. And so I would say, like, there's wisdom there. You'll know that a little bit.
Or
But sometimes,
or friends that you've led with before.
yeah,
So
and that's different. So you have track record, right? And so, but if you're like personal friends, and then all of a sudden you're in a little bit of a different position where you're the leader, that's a different category, right? Because you don't know how they're going to react as they're put in that different structure. But if you've got track record with these people, that's a little bit of a different story, because you can work with that. But usually, as we're planting churches, it's not necessarily seasoned leadership. Like if you're planting out of a church and you've known those people that's a different story, because there's track record there. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions, comments so far as we're journeying on this a little bit? So, okay. The next one is look for fruitfulness. Are they influencing people? So are they actually leading where they are right now? Is there people following them? Is there are they growing? Is there fruit of growth in their life? Is there forward momentum as far as that goes? And so look for fruitfulness along the way. So many times, once again, back to we give people leadership based on talent rather than fruitfulness. Like, I wonder what the kingdom of God would look like if we're like, okay, let's make the leaders the people who are actually winning people for Jesus, the people who are actually discipling people for Jesus. What would happen if we did that rather than like worldly leadership giftings? And so I'd challenge you to say, look for fruitfulness in their lives. Same kind of idea is number 6 is to look for a teachability over their lives. So it was interesting. I had this guy, and his name is Gerald, and he came to our leadership team, and he I invited him to be part of our leadership team, and he said, "Oh, Jay, I want to be part of this," but he said, "I'm really like, I'll use this crassness." He said, "I'm really Dutch," and he said, "That means I'm hard-headed," and I'm like, "No, it doesn't, Gerald." He's like, "Yes, it does," and he said, "This is the thing. I don't know if I'm teachable or not." He said, I'm sometimes like really, really hard to be teachable. And I actually talked him through this a little bit. And I said, the fact that you are saying this probably means that you're teachable, Gerald. Like you're self-aware of this, and we can work within this. And he actually was one of the most teachable persons on our board that we had, and became like just a star performer on our leadership team. But he walked with that level of teachability. There's other people that came in, and they just didn't want to hear anyone else's thoughts. They didn't want to hear anyone else's opinions. They just weren't teachable. And so so look for that teachability in people. I think I can take a C-level leader, but if they're teachable, you can get them to a B+ or an A. Do you know what I mean? But the person who's like A- and isn't teachable, I'd rather have the C level and work the way up with them, and kind of journey them through that leadership ranking and abilities, because they're just open to learn. I had this other girl, her name was Trish, and when she started on leadership, she was such an anxious person, and she hadn't been in a leadership role before, and so there's so much to learn. And I would say when she started, she wasn't super strong leader, but it was just a gradual climb. And every month, she was at the end of every meeting, she'd be the one that would want the meeting after the meeting. Okay, Jay, tell me what I did, like that I could have grown here. Tell me what I could have done better. Did I speak out of turn here? Did I, you know what I mean? Like we did a full debrief, like after almost every meeting. And and I'll welcome that every time, you know what I mean? Because it's just people that want to grow, and it wasn't just lip service, but it was actually like taking notes and like, hey, I'm going to grow in my leadership. So, are they teachable? That's a big question to ask. You know what I mean? What does that look like? So, yeah, teachability. Number 7 is find rounded skill sets. So oftentimes on leadership teams, we're drawn to people who are kind of like us. And we're drawn to people who think like us, have the same sense of humor as us, socio-demographic probably similar to us, all those kind of things. And in leadership, we got to look for different strengths within the body and say, okay, what are we missing here? Now, this isn't like minority government where you say, okay, well, we have to have, you know what I mean? Because you're still picking God, like letting God direct our paths, and picking people that the Lord would have. But at the same point, you have to know what you're missing around the table is a key thing. So one of the things that we did, even with our district executive, for instance, so we're talking about this on Wednesday, is we developed a matrix of, okay, what are some areas, some key things that we would like to see? And so we had, because we're going to appoint 2 people, 2 lay people to our board. So we had to say, okay, what are we missing on our leadership team now? And so we did a matrix of, okay, what was their experience like in small church, big church, rural, urban? What's our cultural makeup? What's our age demographics look like? What is, do they have experience in governance? Do they have experience in production? Do they have experience in building work? Do they have experience in teaching and education? Do they have experience? And go through a list and make out a matrix of like, what are all the aspects? And so what are the areas that we're maybe missing on our team that we should be like looking for, and not just looking for, but prayerfully saying, God, bring us somebody that has a skill set and gifting in this particular area. God, bring us somebody to the table to fill in the gaps that we're missing. See, I believe back to the body has everything. The Lord's going to bring everything that you need for that body. So we just need to pray it in and say, okay, God, we got to round out this body and make it look like our leadership team is kind of functioning in every area. I was in the church on Sunday, and I think I can say this, I was at Royal View in London on Sunday. And I thought their leadership team, I did a little teaching time with their leadership team, and I was so impressed. They had a leadership team that there was 9 people, I want to say 8 or 9 people on their leadership team, which was fairly big, but probably a little too big. But it also had a really good mix on it. So they had people that were in their late 70s on their leadership team. They had people in their 20s on their leadership team. They had young families on their leadership team. They had singles. They had like a little bit of, they had different cultural backgrounds. So they had Africans, Asians, Southeast Asians, and Caucasians on the leadership team. They had some very, very well-to-do people on their leadership team. They had some people who were not well-to-do on their leadership team, fiscally speaking. They had, just a real mixed bag. And they came together, and I thought, wow, what a rounded viewpoint that they had. Now, it wasn't that they were just like ticking the boxes and, okay, we have to get somebody from there, but they were actively saying, Lord, send us a well-rounded team that we can work with here. And what's happened in their church as a result. So I was with their leadership team a few years ago, and it was pretty very similar people. And guess what? Their church was very white, very much a age demographic that was in their 50s to 60s years old, all middle class. Like it was just very, and now it's like the whole church has changed, right? I think it starts with the leadership. And so look for rounded skill sets, both skill sets and demographics. So I'm not not just picking people based on who they are, but looking for skill sets too, and all those kind of areas. Okay. The next one is that we don't do it alone. So when it comes to selecting leaders, I think sometimes we try and pick them all of ourselves. So we, as the pastor, say, we have a pastor's council model. And if you read the pastor's council model, which I encourage you to get your constitution and read it, this is what it says in the pastor's council model, that you will pick the first leader for your church. Then you two together will pick the second leader for your church. Then you three together will pick the third leader for your church, or you know what I'm saying. So it kind of goes in that sense where there's wisdom around the table with other people. And so I think where pastors get into trouble sometimes is they try and do it alone. And they meet with people, they interview people, they talk with people, and they do it alone rather than there's just wisdom. Jesus, like, there's a reason he sent them out in groups, not individually. And so I would encourage you, when it comes to selecting leaders, to do so in a group aspect as best you can, and work that through as leaders. And if they're not mature enough to have those conversations about people, they're probably not mature enough to be on the lead team to begin with, right? And so work that through. The next one is refine your ask. And so I think a lot of trouble happen, or a lot of challenges happen. They don't get the leaders that they want because they haven't learned how to ask people to be on their leadership team. So they're apologetic and like, oh, well, if you have nothing else to do, could you be, you're asking people to do kingdom bidding work. Like the greatest thing that you could be a part of is to be a part of church leadership. And so I think you need to not be bashful about asking. I think you also need to know what you're asking of people, to be clear with people what you're asking of them, to know what they're committing themselves to know how long they're committing themselves to know what that commitment looks like. People are much more apt to say yes to something if they know the parameters of what's being asked of them, and to know if they can fit that. I've been around so many leaders who say, well, we can't ask them because they're really busy. And I would absolutely disagree with that statement. So the best leaders are going to be busy people. Usually the busiest people in your church are probably going to be some of the best leaders. And the reason is because they're industrious to begin with. And busy people will find time to invest into you. So don't look for the people who have nothing to do. The people who are doing nothing are probably the people you don't want on your leadership team. But look for people. Don't let that be, let them say no. Sometimes we rehearse why all the excuses why that person can't do it right now. Wow, they just got young kids. I don't think it's a good time for them. Oh, they just started a new job. I don't know. Don't let you say no to them. Let them decide whether this is God's season for them or not, and make that ask very clear. So don't do it alone. Last one is find leaders who are smarter than you are. And one of the keys to leadership is just getting good people around you. An insecure leader sometimes are threatened by people who maybe have more skill set, or maybe are intelligent or well-spoken, whatever the insecurity is that you're dealing with in your own life, that you're like, I don't know if I can have them because they'll threaten me. And I want to tell you, that's like the first nail in your coffin as a leader. If you are too threatened to invite people to be leaders around you. And so one of the things that I've always tried to do, and it's not real hard with the bar that I set, is to have people smarter than me around me. And so when I set the lead team, I have Michael Bronson is on our leadership team for NCN, and he just comes with this incredible amount of wisdom. Dave Slater comes with this incredible amount of wisdom. Wendy Payne, just so much energy and so much passion and wisdom that she comes to the table with. The Blair Mercers of this world. Just fantastic leaders around you will always elevate the leadership. See, one of the things at your church is when you pick your leaders, you're sending a signal to the church what your values are. And that person's going to be representing you wherever they go. And this will either let people feel comfortable and say, okay, I'm in a spot of trust with this church. Or if you select the wrong leaders, it puts people to say, oh, if that person's the leader there, I don't know if I want to be part of this organization. I don't know if I feel trust. And so therefore, who you select as your leaders, oh, so important to the fruitfulness and the longevity and the security of your church moving forward. So yeah, so I just throw that out so far to start things out. So talk to me. What are some of the challenges that you have in selecting leaders? What are some of the things that you're like, this has been a challenge, or getting the right leaders on board? It seems to be a conversation I have often with leaders about getting the right people around the table, getting the right people on the bus, so to speak. So yeah, talk to me for a second on that. Yeah, Johnson.
Quickly, if you follow the pastor's council model, what would be their level of involvement in various things? I know, for example, finances, they are there, but are there any specific things where you can say, okay, this is what they can be involved in, this is a no? Any particular things you have in place?
Yeah, so
you just involve them in everything, or how? Like,
well, and that'll maybe come in my
maybe a
next
vague
little
question,
bit.
but maybe
But
a vague
yeah,
question, but
so it's really important to know what your leadership, what the ask is, right? And so in the early days of the organization, sometimes what can tend to happen is it becomes a bit more management board. So it's like, okay, well, are we going to buy a sound system that costs this much money, or are we going to do this, or what are you going to do that? You know what I mean? What color is the trailer for ministry that we're going to buy going to be? And you know what I mean? What's our logo going to look like? All those kind of questions, management kind of questions. What you want to do is work towards having a policy board, so that management happens within the house, but your leaders are then set to establishing policy and long-term vision over the house. And so what can happen is when you get into leadership structures is the day-to-day ongoing things can burn up so much time and energy that you actually don't get to the high view of leadership, right? Like the long-term, where are we going? So you're in reactionary management stuff versus saying, no, I want to be in proactive, long-term leadership structures that I'm forecasting out. We're setting the long-term vision over the house. And so sometimes you have to almost even divide those meetings when you're first starting, because the management will be the vacuum that kind of sucks you into that world. And you have to be disciplined to get the long-term vision stuff. So when I was in the early days, like where I didn't have two teams. So as we grew, then I divided the leadership, and then I just called it my dream team / pastors council team. That was like the long term. Then I had like an elders / action team, I called it, which was like the management questions, and we kept those separate. But in the early days, we didn't have that. So I kept the two groups. So then I would have separate meetings, because if I just try to do it all in one meeting, it would always default to going into the management questions and not the long term. So I had to have management type meetings, and then I had to have vision cast meetings in order to get it done. But that's just me. Maybe I just wasn't skilled enough to keep it up here, and it would always just get into the weeds, right? Jeff or Jen? Not sure who's asking it.
Yeah, it was me. So our
The
model
hand was on
is-
your side. That's why I thought it was, but then I thought there
Fair
isn't
enough.
one on either side. So yeah.
That's
So,
true. That's true. Our model is slightly different than a typical church setting because it is a campus setting. And so we have a widely diverse group of people that we could pull from. as far as leadership goes. How best, thinking about the whole, the matrix of the skill sets and diversity and all that, how best do you integrate leadership that may not be PAOC? And how do you take those potentially conflict-based issues that could arise on a leadership team and merge that together? Because we do in a lot of cases want to have a very non-denominational approach because of the diversity of the students we're dealing with. But as far as leadership, how do we handle that? Or is it best to avoid that and stick with kind of that PAOC approach versus maybe pulling in a Baptist or something?
Well, it comes down to leaders of levels of leadership. So what influence do they have the keys over? So if they have the keys over the DNA of vision, well, then I'd be really careful. If it's management based and it's like, okay, how are we going to do an outreach for these people? Well, it doesn't matter then, right? Like, or it doesn't, it's not that it doesn't matter, but it matters differently. If that, so whoever holds the keys over the long-term vision of the house, though, needs to be aligned with you theologically. They need to be aligned, because that's going to be the thing that becomes the sticking point, right? You'll get over time theological drift if you don't. And so the people that are back to, once again, the management people can be different than the vision casting people. And this team doesn't have to be big, the vision casting people. They're the ones that kind of set the course long term. But the management people, like, you have to fill that out a little bit more robust, just to be able to deal with all the issues of what's going on, right? But these people, that can stay a little tighter, but they have to be bought in. Now, it's not to say that you can't grow people into that. So it doesn't mean that they have to be quote unquote Pentecostal, PAOC Pentecostal, but they have to align with your statement of faith and essential truths, essentially, right? Like, they have to say, okay, the things that we hold dear, they need to hold dear. Does that make sense? Johnson, did that answer your question too, what I said earlier, just kind of on that? So, yeah. Anyone else on this area?
Jason, what would you say the ideal number is for how many people you have on your pastor's council?
Okay.
What would you say there?
Well, I think it changes over time as you grow. I think the danger is it gets too big, kind of the whole, is it Elon Musk or whatever that says you shouldn't have any meeting that's bigger than 2 pizzas would feed. I think that's kind of true. So you got to keep, sometimes those bigger teams, they just become like useless. And I've sat around a lot of too many, in fact, board tables that are just so ginormous that nothing happens. They become informational rather than vision casting. So you have to divide them into smaller groups, keep it a tight table. So I would say when you're starting, a good number, you have to have 3. So that's the bare minimum. And so you have to have 3 around the table as your bare minimum. Constitutionally, governmentally, so you have to have 3 and they can't be at arm's length. So that's important to note as well. So, and by arm's length, it means you can't have your spouse, or you can't have your brother, or you can't have, like, you have to be people of different households. And then I would say 5 is a really nice number. That's where I see like a kind of a good working group. As you're smaller, as you grow, pull it out to 7. But I would say in the early days, between the 4 or 5 is a good number as a small church. One of the things that I've always said is, as we doubled in size, every time we doubled in size, we had to change our leadership structure. So when we were 8 people, we had one structure. When we went to 16, oh, we're getting a little bigger. When we went to 32, we had to change it again. We went to 64, we had to change again. We went to 120 or 130, whatever that number, we had to change it again. Like, every time we doubled in size, it meant that was a time to revisit our leadership structure, and probably our old structure didn't serve us well to move forward into the next season. And so that's just like, there's, I haven't read a book on that, or I don't know if that's advice everyone else would give you. That's from my track record. Just every time you double in size, it probably is an outdated structure that you need to look at.
Is 5 including the pastor?
Yeah, or yeah, I think that's there's no magic number, but I would say 5 people is a good number. You got some critical mass, just different thoughts around the table, and it is good. So whether it's 5 plus the pastor or 5 with the pastor, just somewhere in that neighborhood. Once you get it bigger, once again, it's not a magic number. It's about finding the right people. So sometimes we get stuck on a number, and so my board would fluctuate in number. So some years we'd have this many, some years we'd have this many, because if you don't have the right people, I don't want to just stick somebody in for the sake of having X amount of people. Like that's a mistake, and that's the mistake that a lot of churches would have. That's why I actually would encourage you in the early days to have the pastor's council model rather than the elected board model, because the elected board says you have to have this many people, right? And that's the danger, is then sometimes you don't have that many good leaders around the table, and then you can lower the bar on what the leadership is like. Does that make sense, Johnson? Good. Okay, I got a question come in. With church planting, as you grow and you find the right people, do you have to get them voted in? So pastor's council model says that you would select. So if that's the leadership style that you have, which we encourage everybody as church planters to do, is you have to get them ratified at your annual meeting. So they're not selecting the people. So you're bringing the slate of names and saying, we are ratifying this group of people. So for instance, our NCN lead team. So I would, if it was coming before a church family, and I'd say, okay, I've got Michael, I got Dave, I got Wendy, I got Blair, let's ratify these names. And then the church would vote on those names. If they say no, then we have a bigger issue to deal with. Like, okay, the church has lost trust in the leadership team. We got to do a big check here. But that's kind of, so it's one vote, ratification vote of the leadership team as a whole, not each individual name. Does that make sense? Okay, we're going to jump into part 2 here, and I'll try and go quick on this as well. So the first one is how to find those leaders, and getting the right leaders, so key. The second one is how can you help the leaders to do well in their role, and in other words, how can you have best practices and things that function well. So there's a million things you could read on this, but I'm just going to this is just purely experiential. Okay. I will comment here. The first point comes from John Pillow's book, and it's titled The Most Important Relationship. It's about board. I would encourage you, get that book. So John Pillow, he's a credential holder with us, and he's the head of the 4 C's, which is the Canadian Council for Christian Charities. And his name is John Pillow, Pellow. And so he's Jesse's got it there. So your backdrop is, yeah, there you go. The board's most important relationship. And I didn't know you had a virtual background until you went to hold that up. I just thought it was actually your backdrop. So that's
So
cool.
sneaky, right?
Yeah. So John Pillow, there's a few reasons why his stuff's excellent. Number 1, it's really good stuff. So it's just flat out, it's really good. Number 2, he comes from a Canadian perspective. So Canadian charitable law, American charitable law, totally different. And sometimes when you read books on American church governance, it'll just mess you up. So this comes from a Canadian context. Number 3, he's PAOC, he's a credential holder with us. So he doesn't advertise that because he's trying to appeal to the whole, but he actually is. And so he gets our culture, and it's written, and you can see a lot of things coming through based on our polity. And so culturally, it's really good. So I was exposed to his stuff after I took this role at the district, and I was like, dang, I would have been a much better pastor had I read this before. When I was pastoring, it would have been really good. So yeah. Okay. So a couple things. Number 1, is we need to earn leadership's trust. And so I think that's a key thing. Jeremy Murdoch, who's our Northern Regional Director, he always writes earning the trust on all of his emails. He has his little tagline. I think it's good. Understand that you're always earning the trust of the leadership team. So give reasons for them to trust you. I always say you're putting little points into the trust bank. Everything that you do that's positive, every time you make a withdrawal though. And as a leader, you need to know where you are in the trust bank with your leadership and say, okay, where am I at? Have I expired the point? Sometimes you make a withdrawal and say, okay, we're going to try this big thing. And you kind of put it out there, but you're always building those things in. So how do you build the trust? A couple things. Be an expert on your mission. So you need to be the person who knows the mission of the church better than anybody else, inside and out. You need to be breathing. It needs to just like leak out of you. You've heard that term, leaking vision, wherever you go. That just needs to leak out of you wherever you go, that people just like, oh, Jason, he's saying it all again. Remember Nehemiah, he just kept repeating the vision, repeating the vision, repeating the vision. And sometimes you've said it so many times that you're like, oh, they're sick of hearing this. No, just keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. And so be the expert on the mission. I think you need to be aware and connected, be understanding the dynamics of what's going on, stay close to the key stakeholders. You need to kind of know the mission of, or know the rumblings of what's going on. I put a maintain a no surprise policy. Some people love to surprise people, and they love to have the big zingers in meetings, or the gotchas, or like, I'm going to ask the really hard question during this meeting, or I'm going to spring something on people. I don't like that in meetings. I hate that. I have a no surprise policy. So I have a soft talk with people before. If there's going to be something controversial, like I'll call them and say, hey, this is coming up in the agenda. Just want you to be aware, just on the down low. Let's talk about this a little bit. If I have a question for somebody, I don't bring it up and embarrass them in the meeting. I try and have that conversation ahead of time. So if I'm asking questions in the meeting, it's questions to make people look good, or they didn't respond when I talked to them. And so it's a no surprise kind of policy. They know the question's coming, like, hey, just so you know, this is going to come up in the meeting. And when you function that way, it just puts everybody at ease. If you're the person that likes big surprises, you put the meeting on edge right from the beginning all the time. People don't know what's going to come. They don't know what's going to happen in the meeting, and they're always on edge. So I just think the no surprise policy to leadership is really, really key. Sometimes even in our district executive, people will come in with questions and they'll be like, and they'll just try like to shock people. I'm like, why do that? Why not? Why wouldn't you just pick up the phone ahead of time and say, hey, I got an issue here. Let me talk it through before the meeting. So that no surprise policy. Act with responsibility, build trust, commit to excellence. If what you do is like, they know that you're trying to commit to excellence on stuff. If you come in sloppy and things aren't ready, and it speaks to the level. And so then you can expect them to they just say, oh, sloppiness is tolerated. Oh, messy, you know what I mean? So always are raising that bar. I think being ready to apologize is a big one, is earning trust. If you're a leader that just apologizes when you're wrong, so many leaders, that's like the hardest thing. And I get it, I'm there too. And it's hard to say, you know what, I just dropped it on this one. But you can set a culture actually over your meetings and earn trust with people if you're quick to apologize, if you lose your temper in a meeting, or if you say stuff that was like, be quick to apologize. Guys, you know what, I said things in that meeting that I shouldn't have done. You know what I mean? I acted in the wrong way. Whatever. And be forthright and be open with that. I have to do a lot of apologizing after meetings. I'm a guy that's just regularly like, oh man, I said stuff. And so, you eat a little bit of humble pie. So provide complete reports, build trust with them so that things they know that like it's ready. Don't withhold bad news. This is a big one in earning trust with people. So many times pastors are like, I can't report on something that didn't go well. I can't tell them that things, and so they try and be secretive about the bad news. I want to tell you, if you're forthright with the bad news, you build trust with people. Like take it full on and say, okay, I'm going to deal with the bad stuff and get it out of the way. So yeah. And walk with your board policy. You should know your constitution. And this is something, I know it's boring reading. I know constitutions are like the opposite of what church planners want to read, like the complete utter opposite. But the Constitution is like your best friend. So get to know your Constitution, get to know what's in there, get to learn your Constitution. So number one, earn leadership trust. Number two, properly train leaders. So when I hear people, oftentimes the thing that comes up when I talk with people is the leaders didn't feel trained. They felt like they came into this and you were like, yeah, it's simple. It's not, and because you're a pastor, you've probably been on boards before. You've been on, and people come in, they're like, I don't know what to expect. This is all new. And it feels overwhelming sometimes. I'm someone that just came into some new boards just because of the role change that I'm in. And so all of a sudden I come in and there's new acronyms that I got to learn. There's new, like what's going on in this. And even today I'm in this, I was on a new board that I haven't been on today. And I'm in this governance board and I'm like, oh, okay, what are they talking about? What are they talking about? You know what I mean? And I tried to read the minutes from before, but there's something that wasn't reflective in the minutes. And I'm like trying to get up to speed. Do training with your leadership team. So understand that usually in boards, they're novice leaders. So they're not necessarily on boards of corporations. They're not on boards of whatever. This is sometimes the only time they've served on a leadership team. So you got to do some training. Understand, back to what kind of board you want to be. Do you want to be a management board? Do you want to be a policy board? Do you want to be an endowment board? You kind of need to stay in the policy board kind of mode and set policy, set what you're going to be about. Have us come and do some training with you. So all of our RDs have really good training for doing board training stuff. And we can come and do board training for you and walk your leadership team through some training. And we would love to do that. If you get that from the start, and just like, here's what you should know as a board, here's what you shouldn't be doing, and those kind of things. This is a big one. And this is where the homework's going to come in. So have a working job description for every leadership role in your church. So not just a board, but every person who's a leader in your church, if you have a working job description. And that's a hard thing, more difficult than easier to do. But I want to tell you that will save so much issues at your church. If you just say, okay, here's the leadership positions at my church. Here's the job description. We're going to have this down. And this is, okay, if you're the sound tech, here's the job description for the sound tech. If you're a musician, a guitar player, if you're the kids ministry person, this is what the job description looks like. And people feel like, wow, when they receive something in their hand, here's a job description. And they're like, wow, this is actually a real thing they're asking me to do. It's just not like, hey, I wanted to fill something with a warm body right now, but they actually see the parameters of what's being asked. So properly train those people. Your leader should get the best of your time out of anybody in the church. Your leader should get the best of your teaching of anybody in the church. Your leader should get the best of your leadership of anybody in the church. So always remember that they should always be getting the best of what you have. Sometimes there's secondary. You think, well, they're the leaders. I don't need to invest. No. Properly train them. Give them your best. So earn leadership trust, properly train leaders. Number 3 is have healthy expectations. I think clear expectations, and this kind of goes along with the job description, but having those expectations will keep you and keep them from frustration. So one of the things that I have our leadership team, when I was pastoring, I had our leadership team do every single year is sign a covenant of expectation. And they would sign off. I can send you what we had, maybe Diane, she's on here, she can send that out later. And it's outdated probably now. That was a bunch of years ago, and you'd probably want something better than what I had. But some sort of expectation of what's going to be involved. I would also encourage you to set meeting dates ahead of time so that people, like, you're going to ask the good leaders to be leaders in your church, the strongest of leaders. So therefore, value their time. Set your agendas and set your leadership dates before the year begins. And then people won't be not showing up. Be like, no, my expectation is you clear your schedule. Like, what's involved in this? Know before the year starts. I'm going to have a leadership team this day, whatever. And if you're doing it ad hoc and you're like, oh, I want to have one next Tuesday, you can't expect people to have clear schedules to do that. And then you're expecting not good results in your meeting. But if you plan those ahead and you have those expectations, like, no, you're going to like clear your schedules. I expect that like 100% participation in this unless something's offside. Like, just know what those expectations are. Everyone's different, but know that. Number 3 is have a humility and openness. So I think for us, don't be defensive, be humble. Too many times leaders get to a spot where they want to be the pastor and the big deal, and that's so opposite to Jesus' ways. If you come with a humility around yourself and say, you know what, I'm willing to take feedback. If you establish a culture of open to criticism and feedback, it will allow others the same, and then the organization will grow. If you get defensive and every time somebody says, that wasn't a good whatever, then it'll clam up and people won't want to challenge you on things, and then the organization won't get better. And so you have to really work at fostering that humility and openness. Be self-aware, be open to the critics, be aware of your strengths and weaknesses, and be considerate to your board and assume that they want the best for you. So yeah, so humility and openness. Number 5, set your meetings up to win. This is a big one. So many times we run into troubles because we set meetings when it's convenient for us and we just want to get through stuff versus when it actually would be most beneficial for them. And so what timings do you have? I remember I used to do our leadership team meetings because it was convenient for everyone. So convenience isn't always best, right? And so it would be convenient and they would be like, oh, let's do Sunday after church. And we do it. And people would come in and they were utterly exhausted because they'd served in the morning, they hadn't had lunch, they were hangry and tired. And then I would get into these meetings. I'm like, why are these people so grumpy? You know what I mean? Like, why are they always like barking and like, I was like, well, stupid Jason, like, come on. I set them up to fail because I had it at a bad time. You know, when I structured the meetings in and had it at a reasonable time. I always try and have food at meetings, and like it just takes the edge off. There's a reason that Jesus ate with people. There's something about that. It's not that you have to have a feast, but I'm just like, even when people are a little hangry, they're different, right? So if they have a little bit of food inside of them, it's like, ooh, I can relax a little bit right now. So pick a time that's good on them. Pick a meeting space that's conducive. So sometimes we're in meeting spaces, and I was a bit cheap, and so sometimes I didn't put the heat on midweek, and then we'd be in these meetings, and it would be like it's so cold, and then you're like, well, people can't be creative when they're freezing to death. You know what I mean? Pick a room. So for me, spatial things aren't a big deal. Like, so if I'm in a room without a window, I'm like, fine. But there's other people that like, no, they need a space conducive to creativity, and so finding the right space is really key and really important if you want to have success. Rick Warren talks about that people like are more creative. So he has like where his leadership team is, and I'm not saying you have to because different cultures, right? But he's got these big, super lazy boy recliners, and that's his board room. And he's like, people are better creative when they're comfortable. And so he's like, he gets this spot where everyone's like super comfortable. Okay, now we can get to the creativity and talk about. So I'm just saying, set up your meetings to win, whatever that looks like for you. Every culture is a little different. Every place is a little different, but set timing, set schedules, set the environment. Just get it to a spot where it's like, oh, okay, all the exterior things are in place to allow this meeting to be successful. Number 6 is, or I think whatever number we're on is bring enrichment to the meeting. So I always want to bring it so that when I come to a meeting that actually they leave thinking, wow, I learned something, not just about our organization. I didn't just give, but I actually received something as part of this. that you're actually growing the people that you're with. And even today, I was on a meeting and one of these Zoom calls today, and one of the girls on this leadership team, she sent me this long note after the meeting, and she said, "It is such an honor to be a part of this team." She said, "I learned so much today." She said, "I just felt like I grew as a leader just for being a part of the meeting." And she felt invested into it. I thought, wow, what a great thing, right? And so you can guarantee she's going to stay part of the team because she's being enriched as because she's on it. So bring enrichment to the people. Number 7 is keep the main thing the main thing. So this is one of your most important tasks as a leader, to keep the main thing the main thing, to keep them on track, to keep them that vision. Once again, be the champion of vision, be the champion of vision. So when people get off on the rabbit trails, you got to pull it back in and say, no, 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 let's keep on vision. When we get into issues where it's like, we're going to fight about the color of carpet. No, 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 we're not. We're going to talk about vision. We're going to talk about the things that matter. And if you fill them with the things that matter, you know, the old adage, you have no time to rock the boat if you're busy rowing it, right? And so if you can keep people on track, going on a direction and on a path, then you'll stay out of the weeds and the silliness on things that don't matter. That's a challenge. So to keep them on mission, you gotta come prepared. You gotta make sure that agenda, your time spending the agenda, should be one of your most thoughtful, the most ordered steps of your entire ministry. Your agenda should be something that you work over, talk through, wrestle through. It shouldn't be something that you like boop, 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 5 minutes before a meeting or whenever. That should be something that you really, really pour into. So keep them talking about what you need to be talked about, not about peripheral things. Don't just fill an agenda for the sake of like, okay, I gotta keep them busy for an hour and a half in this meeting, so I gotta write some stuff down. No, 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 no. Like that needs to be crafted, curated, edited, so that you're like, and where you put things on the agenda. That's another big key. So when you put an agenda, you'll notice in probably most meetings, whatever's first on the agenda gets talked about the longest, and will get ripped apart and debated. So the thing that you want to be ripped apart and debated, put that first, and then the thing that is like, no, no, okay, this is what we're going to dial into and work through and workshop, maybe put that later in the agenda, and then the housekeeping issues, put them at the end. Oftentimes, and this was my fail at the beginning, I always put all the, let's go over the minutes, let's do the review at the beginning. And I've just learned I got to switch that up and do that near the end, get people when they're at their most creative at the beginning of the meeting, and then work at the other stuff down the road. So keeping the main thing the main thing. And then number 8, finally, this evening, is assume your board's goodwill. So some of us, we can get into a mode where you almost can be self-fulfilling prophecy, where I've seen pastors come in and they think the board's out to get them. And so then they come into the meeting like on the defensive at the beginning, or they're like dreading the meeting. And they're like, oh, I got a board meeting tonight. And be like, no, no, no. I get to invest into my leaders. I get to hear from my leaders. This is the best part of my ministry right here. And it needs to be. And if it's not, you got to reframe your heart and say, okay, Lord, this is like the most important thing I do in ministry. And so assume their best, that they actually want the best for you, that they're not out saying, okay, how can I punish that pastor? How can I get to them? How can I rip them? No, no, they actually want the best for you. They're cheering you on. So try and interpret what they're saying through that. Sometimes you have people and they just communicate oddly. I had this guy, and his name is Alan. He's a good guy, but he was so direct, and I had to learn that he actually wanted my best. He'd come after Sunday and he'd be like, Jay, that was a really bad sermon. Are you okay? And, you know, I was like, at the beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, who is this guy? Like, seriously. But then over time, I started to learn he actually wanted my best. And he was genuinely concerned. And he was like, no, he could have like worked on like softening the language a little bit. But quite literally, he always wanted my best. And I began to realize he was more concerned for me than anyone else. And so I could take it and say, okay, when I heard stuff from him, I had to filter it through that. He wants my best. He wants my best. He wants my best. And and assume that most of those people are going to do that. And if they don't, then you got to work through that. But yeah. So earn leadership trust, properly train your leaders, healthy expectations, humility and openness, set up your meetings to win, bring enrichment to the people, keep the main thing, and assume your board's goodwill. So what I would suggest to you is, as homework, I would encourage you to have a board plan for the year, to say, okay, chart out your leadership meetings for the entire year and say, what enrichment am I going to bring throughout the year? What are going to be the big vision pieces that I'm going to talk about at certain times of the year? Sometimes we're like in a hurry and we got to do it right away. But like, what if you charted it out and said, okay, understand February, everyone's down in the dumps. Don't try and redo the world in February, because it's going to just be negative. So in February, I got to pump them up. But in March, it's going to be springtime, and there's an appetite for some change, and understand kind of the focus, and map out a year's worth of your leadership team meetings. It doesn't mean that you fill in all the blanks of everything that you got to talk about, but you can look at the big picture of where you're going and say, okay, how does that leadership team meeting look? That's what I'm doing right now with our district executive. I'm mapping out the whole year and saying, okay, where do I want to take this? Where do I want to invest into them? How can I do that best throughout the course of the year? What meetings do I need, and who do I need to bring in as guests? So once again, I'm going to give my very best to the leadership team. So I'm going to try and bring in good quality guests that will speak into them, challenge them, make us think differently, and I'm going to chart out that year of meetings so that we can hopefully win when it comes to that. So thoughts, questions, as we chat a little bit about your investment into them. So talk to me about what some of the struggles that you would have right now. Kareem.
So it wasn't a struggle. It was more a question that I wanted to get to would be the with when mapping out the leadership meetings. Is this specifically like your pastoral council, or would this be even like leadership meeting with, say, your music department, your production department, your
I think
next
the more
generation, if you're gonna have that.
I think the more intentional,
mapping that out for the whole year and thinking about every single one of the departments and different things that you want to do.
Yeah, I think having the big vision for each of those leadership teams is really key. So, okay, with our worship band, where do we want to take them over this next year? And so what do we want to work through, and then work back from there and say, okay, if this is the big key vision stuff that I want to get across throughout the year, what are the things that I need to do incrementally, of course, and what's the best months to do those in? What's the best time of year to do that in? Once again, setting up to win. And so where are they going to be the most receptive? Okay, I'm not going to start anything new at Christmas because they're going to be nuts already with all Christmas music and whatever. So I would never do that then, right? And pick out those key times to say, okay, when am I going to onboard new leaders? And so therefore I need to be intentional about, okay, what am I doing when I onboard these leaders? Am I doing that in September? Am I doing that, in January? And so therefore work back from there. And so just have a game plan with all of the leadership teams that you work with about, okay, how can I be intentional? It's not filling in all the gaps, but it's just saying an overarching big plan for leadership development on each one of those. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
I have a question about leadership retreats. I've been to some that were like absolutely fruitful and amazing, and I've been to some leadership retreats that were kind of like, why are we all here for the whole weekend? Because we haven't discussed anything. Just totally being real. So I'm kind of curious, like, what your take on leadership retreats is, who you would take on a leadership retreat. Like, would you just take your board? Would you do one with a worship team, or set like the worship leader and them alone on a retreat? Or, like, how would you kind of, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So once again, so who you take is around what intention you want to get out of it, right? And so deciding what your outcomes are going to be. I actually am a big proponent. I think leadership retreats are essential. So we did them with our lead team twice a year. I did a 1 day, just a Saturday once a year, and then I did a whole weekend once a year with them. When it comes to content for them, you want to be hearing and curating that time together really well. And so small group breakout times, having different moments where they're growing and pouring in. Once again, the questions you ask as a leader is the key thing. So you need to be thinking through, what questions do I need to ask in order to get stuff out of people, in order to spark people on to different ways of thinking, in order to like pull together. So curating those questions as you bring in guests. I didn't bring a lot of guests into our leadership retreat times because but there is occasion when you would do that. Sometimes I did a strategic planning one. I brought like Mark Collins in for one and said, okay, help us with the strategic planning time. And so had him do that for one along the way. I had Bill Morrow come in for one, and I said, okay, come. And Bill's like, ooh, it was 1,000 miles an hour, right? And brought our leadership team in. I brought our leadership team to places that I wanted to see sometimes for retreats. So we were looking at doing building stuff. So I brought them actually to Mapleview and Barrie, and I said, and I spent time with Jay for the morning with our leadership team, and it just sparked them up. There's a million questions, you know what I mean? I brought them as a leadership team. When we first started the church, I brought them to a church plant when we weren't doing Sunday meetings yet. And we'd go to a different church plant, and I would meet with the leader after and ask them a bunch of questions and work through. So yeah, once again, investing into those people is really, really key. And you can't go wrong when you invest into your leaders.
Thanks. Yeah, it's
Does that
great.
answer your question?
Yeah, I love it.
And I think one of the key things that I wanted to get across: don't ever have a meeting that could have been an email. And so many times we insult people by we write stuff and then we send them the agenda and then we read the stuff right in front of them. Like, no. You want to do a meeting where you're getting from them. So that's their leader. So the point of them is to be feeding back to you. So asking more questions than telling is the key to those times, to curate those times together as leaders. Another question or comment? Or what is some of your leadership challenges?
Jason, what's we pray this never ever happens to any of us, but say someone on like your pastor's council needed to be removed for whatever reason, what does that look like? Like, what's the process? And have you have any stories that you've heard of where, stuff like that?
Yeah, good question. It all depends on what they did. So if it's an issue of non-compliance, so it comes back to, so a couple of things. Number one is the safeguard of that covenant that you write is really, really key. So if you have that covenant in place that they signed and you signed, then you can come back to them and say, you know what, you're not living up to your covenant here. Like, there's issues here. Are you going to address those, or do we need to address them? And do you need to step down? And I've had those tough conversations with leaders before. It's a lot easier when they recognize it and you say, hey, here's the covenant that you signed. Are you living up to this? And they'd say, oh, no, sorry, I'm not. And then that's a little bit of an easier thing. When there's disciplinary issues, your constitution gives you some reason to go at that for disciplinary concerns and to remove membership and to remove someone from leadership. That's a little bit trickier. And sometimes I would encourage you to pull in a district leader to navigate those waters, because they can get messy in a big hurry. And so to walk through with that. And then you have termed leadership. So sometimes it's just like, okay, just next year, you're not going to be added to the leadership team. Like, if it's just like, they're kind of dead weight and they're not like living up to expectations, it's not a character issue, and it's just a performance issue, then you just got to ride it out for the next year and say, okay, for the good of the church and the good of those people, we're you can put them on a performance improvement plan, but if ultimately they can't get there, then you just say, okay, next year we're not going to. So that's where terms come into, terms of office come really into play there, so that you don't have open-ended leadership times. I'm asking you for this amount of time, and then we reevaluate again. Does that make sense? So too many times we hit the nuclear button right away, though, and sometimes it's working through. So, yeah, Kareem.
Just to kind of piggyback off of that. So now somebody is more so they haven't lived up to the covenant. And so mutually, it's a mutual agreement in terms of stepping down. What I've seen in the past is they just step down and they kind of have to live their lives. And this is more safe. It's like a character thing. And my concern sometimes is that there's, and I'm going to say what I think, and then I want to hear your thoughts, which would be that it's not just let them step down, but also have a plan in place on how they can get back to maybe living or getting to that space of, you know, the expectation, because oftentimes almost having them leave is almost even encouraging them to go further down whatever path that that they've been on. So not just stepping down, but also then talking to them about some sort of plan in place to help them to get back to where they were and the reasons why they were on the leadership team or thought of the leadership team in the first place. Because yeah, I think people's walks is more important sometimes than even everything else. So yeah.
So here's what I would believe is I believe discipline should be restorative, not punitive. And so if you're putting somebody into discipline to be punitive and be like, okay, I'm gonna put you in your place, you know what I mean? That doesn't serve anyone well, but it needs to be restorative in nature. And so it's like, even here at the district, so if somebody has a moral failure or an issue and they lose their credential, we don't just like, okay, you're done. We say, no. We want to come alongside you and walk you through a restoration process. And so to give some thought to your restoration process, we can help you with that. I talked with 2 leaders this week who had one of their key volunteers that had some morality issues. And so I gave them some tools to walk them through a restoration process and a discipleship restoration process that they can walk through and journey on. Now the people have to agree to that. Sometimes when credential holders, when we bring discipline, they're like, I'm done with the district, screw you, I'm out of here, kind of thing. We don't want anything to do with, and you can't help that, but you just have the offer that whenever you're ready, we would love to walk in the restoration process with you. You can't have someone walk in restoration who doesn't want to. So you can just leave the arms open and like the prodigal son, I'm waiting on the porch, I'm looking for you to come home, and then I'm going to run and embrace you, and we're going to walk in this journey together. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's good. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jeff.
So as like we're going through this and I'm thinking about all these things that you're sharing about healthy leaders. And I think the one thing that I'm missing or maybe wasn't the to be covered in this is how do we ensure that we are healthy so that we can be a healthy leader for our leaders? So is there like, I know that I've heard as a credential, there's like a counseling network or something. Like, what are some of the resources that are available to us as credential holders to ensure that we're at a healthy place to lead others?
Great question. So a few things. So on the back of your credential card, there is a pastor's helpline on there. That's a 24/7 service with counseling. And so that you just tell them that you're a credential holder with us. There's some free counseling that triggers. That they'll ask you a few cursory questions to find out what kind of counselor you need to be with. So I think that's key. But that shouldn't be reactive all the time. I think it's healthy to have some coaching and counseling going on in our own life all the time. And so that's a key thing. As a district, I think walking in relationship is really the key to most health checkpoints. And so there's a lot of lone rangers in our district and they'll do their own things but the healthiest of leaders are ones who walk in relationship. So that doesn't happen overnight, those relationships, but over long-term investment. So one of the things that like NCN that we're trying to do is create networks so that you are in relationship with people, because you can't just bleed in front of your congregation all the time. Like if you're going through something, there's a different level, right? Of like, I can't just share everything that I'm going through. Like I have to find confided people that I can really be open and honest with. And so those people don't happen overnight, but I want to encourage you as you invest in, as you show up, as you are vulnerable with people, it happens. So that's why we create section events. That's why we create the NCN. That's why we create different networks so that you can kind of get into relationship. And so I encourage you. I would also encourage you to have some mentors. And so you need to seek out people that are going to mentor you in this journey. And so be asking people, hey, can I take you out for lunch and a coffee and just mentor me and ask some of the hard questions, do you know what I mean, over my life and over my world. And so that's a key component as well. Having a relationship with your RD and having a relationship with your section pastor is the reason that those people are in existence. And so they're touch point people so that you can be connecting with those. Having a relationship with some of our NCN network, some of our leaders on NCN. And so if you don't know them, I would encourage you to like reach out, grab one of them and say, hey, let's walk in this journey together. So you're only ever going to be as transparent as you want to be, right? And so if you've got stuff going on, like the onus is really on you to say, I got to be able to disclose this and chat with somebody and work through this together and get healthy myself. We have a few online tools. Like last year at conference, we paid for everyone to do a health checkup thing, where it was like, hey, where am I at? It was a self-assessment. If you want one of those and you didn't do it, I think we still have some of those available. We paid for people to do those. They're just an assessment tool along the way. But having regular coaching, having regular connection with people, having mentoring people is really the key thing. And once again, we have a health network, so there's that counseling that we pay for and work through. If you need more and you can't afford it, talk to us and we'll work with you on that and work through. We want to see you healthy. And it'll be no judgment. We'll just send you to somebody with a client number. We don't know anything. We don't find out the gritty details. There's no like spying on, hey, what were they dealing with? None of that kind of stuff. So yeah. Kareem?
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback, if you don't mind, off of that, I have a mentor, and you said something that's in line with this, but it's also being proactive with all these things. So like similar how Jason, you talked about like planning out your leadership for the meetings for the year. I would encourage like to even plan out, you're gonna the bare minimum, like no matter what. And then if there's other things that you have to add and you add them after, but like have a mentor talks about having counseling sessions 4 times a year. And I know a lot of people think about only going to counseling when you're going through things. And he's like, no, you go to counseling 4 times a year just to make sure you're okay. That's him. It's not saying that it has to be 4, but figure out what that is for me is what he said. Talked about with your mentors, planning out bare minimum. I'm going to meet with my mentor, throughout the year, my mentor for this, my mentor for that, my mentor for that. And we're going to set up that meeting for the year. I know I'm going to do this, including the touch points with all the other things that the district provides. Plan that out for a year so you're being proactive to be a healthy leader rather than reacting when something happens.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
that's really good. And Kareem, thanks for sharing that. I just think that's so key. And I think along those lines is personal prayer days. So one of the things that I like to have into my calendar before is like prayer retreats and personal prayer days, times that set aside. When I was pastoring, I tried to take 3 days every quarter and get away and pray and write sermons and I would do that by myself sometimes, but then I'd also do it with a friend sometimes. I would go away and we would be separate and fast and pray and then come together and say, okay, what's God spoken to each of us? And we would get together for a bit and then we go away separately. And so just having some of those checkpoints, be intentional about your health. I would say be intentional about all areas of your health. Make sure you're physically like doing stuff. Make sure you got that coaching and that, and then spiritual retreat. So like, body, mind, spirit kind of idea. Yeah, it's good. Good. Well, we've reached the 8:30 mark. as we've journeyed here. So 2 things I want you to do as homework. Number 1, I want you to write a job description for every leadership position in your church. Just some of you already have it and you're like, oh, I can pull the file out. But some of you, that's like, oh, that's going to take some work. And so I want to tell you, the work that you'll put into it on the front end will save you on the back end and will save you a lot of challenges. And then number 2 is have that leadership plan for the year on how you're going to invest into your leaders. If you forget everything else I said, the key thing is here, give your best to your leaders. Give your best to your leaders. If you invest your best into your leaders, the rest of it is going to start to take care of itself. But give your best to your leaders, and your best energy, your best teaching, your best money, your best all these things. Give it to your leaders, and that will be an investment that will pay dividends in the future. Okay. So next month,